Good evening. I didn't know whether I should appear before you. There's a time to show and a time to hide. There's a time to speak and also a time to be silent. What time is it? It's 72 years since H.G. Wells said mind was at the end of its tether. With a frightful queerness come into life. Mind at the end of its tether. I can guess what some of you are thinking. His mind is at the end of its tether. And this could be. It scares me, but it deters me not. The alternative to mind is certainly madness. Our greatest blessings, says Socrates in the Phaedrus, come to us by way of madness, provided that the madness comes from the God. Our real choice is between holy and unholy madness. Open your eyes and look around you. Madness is in the saddle anyhow. Why are mysteries unpublishable? First, they cannot be put into words, at least not the kinds of words which earned you your degrees. Mysteries display themselves in words only if they can remain concealed. This is poetry, isn't it? And second, mysteries are unpublishable because only some can see them, not all. Mysteries are intrinsically esoteric, and as such, are an offense to democracy. Is not publicity a democratic principle? Publication makes it Republican, a thing of the people. I wanted to just read from two or three people. This was Norman Brown, who spent the last 10 years of his life reading the Quran as a form of proto-modernist text. And the reason I bring Norman Brown up is I think it's important to really try to occupy the unoccupiable extremities, whether it's complexity and tweets, whether it's bringing religiosity and humor together, whether it's things you don't normally put together in the same page, in the same voice. I think it's actually very urgent of us to occupy those. We call it the splits, essentially, kind of trying to wrap your mind around two mutually exclusive ideas. And I think, and one of those that I feel, I mean, I can only speak in my own experience. Until 30 years of age, I was basically a dialectical materialist. I didn't believe it existed if I couldn't touch it. And at some point, I started to explore other forms of knowledge that were not the knowledge that was being taught to us in our universities. And more and more we've looked at examples of civil disobedience that are successful in the 20th century. It's interesting to what extent we as intellectuals, as artists, whitewash these movements from their religiosity. I'll just give you three examples. Gandhi, we look at him as a civil rights leader, but we forget the role of faith in his struggle. Martin Luther King, we also forget his baptism and his Christianity and where that led him. And the role of the Catholic Church in Solidarność, which is an example of, very much a relevant example to what Julieta was mentioning about infrastructure, the boring march of progress, because when we think of 89, when we think of sort of iconic moments, we always want these media-friendly, sexy movements, these cool movements, as you said. But actually, the real work is uncool, unsexy, it's behind the scenes, and that's why nobody really thinks of Poland, especially today, the way Poland is today. But even in the past decade, really, nobody thought of Poland. When we thought of 89, we thought of Ceausescu being executed in the square. We thought of Dzerzhinsky's statue being toppled in Lubyanka in Moscow. We thought of the Berlin Wall being chipped away. But Poland didn't offer these iconic visuals. And so it was kind of forgotten. Or in fact, it was Poland that kept the flame alive of the 80s Solidarność movement, that really kept that flame alive. And it asked for real concrete demands. It never frontally asked for the fall of communism. It said, I want better labor conditions. I want better food at the canteen. And it slowly allowed the thing to collapse on itself. I'm not saying that's particularly the only way to go today, but I think it's quite a relevant example. Another important, so there's a great text by James Scott named Domination and the Arts of Resistance. And he talks about the idea that all of our historical study of protest and resistance is looking at the public transcript. Taking a long historical view, one sees that the luxury of relatively safe, open political opposition is both rare and recent. The vast majority of people have been and continue to be not citizens, but subjects. So long as we confine our conception of the political to activity that is openly declared, we are driven to conclude that subordinate groups essentially lack a political life, or that what political life they do have is restricted to those exceptional moments of popular explosion. To do so is to miss the immense political terrain that lies between quiescence, quietude, and revolt. And that, for better or for worse, is the political environment of subject classes. It is to focus on the visible coastline of politics and miss the continent that lies beyond. So what James Scott talks about is how we have to really pay attention to infrapolitics. And he uses the word infrapolitics as infrared, in the sense that the infrapolitics are, and I'll just read his, because he'll say it better than I can. Infrapolitics are the rumors, the gossip, the folk tales, the jokes, the songs, the rituals, the codes and euphemisms. A good part of folk culture fits this description. The public transcript is, to put it crudely, the self-portrait of dominant elites, as they would have themselves seen. Given the usual power of dominant elites to compel performances from others, the discourse of the public transcript is a decidedly lopsided discussion. While it is unlikely to be merely a skein of lies and misrepresentations, it is, on the other hand, a highly partisan and partial narrative. It is designed to be impressive, to affirm and naturalize the power of dominant elites, and to conceal or euphemize the dirty linen of their rule. If, however, this flattering self-portrait is to have any rhetorical force among subordinates, it necessarily involves some concessions to their presumed interests. That is, rulers who aspire to hegemony in the Gramscian sense of the term must make out an ideological case that they rule to some degree on behalf of their subjects. This claim in turn is always highly tendentious, but seldom completely without resonance among subordinates. The safest and most public form of political discourse is that which takes as its basis this flattering self-image. So, in the vein of this idea of hidden transcripts, I think humor. Again, I'd like to just return to humor, maybe as the last installment of this evening. Humor is incredibly generous, but there's obviously there's several kinds of humor, and I think it's important to distinguish between humor which is at the expense of others, and humor which is, I kind of call it a Slavic sense of humor. It's about ourselves. It's kind of side-splitting humor, and for us, the kind of a mascot of this humor is a figure named Mullah Nasruddin. So Mullah Nasruddin is a kind of wise fool. He exists everywhere Muslims historically existed, from Croatia to China, all the way down to Sudan and Somalia. He goes under different names. The Turks call him Hoja, the Arabs Joha, the Chinese Afanti, but Nasruddin is his name essentially. And he's the closest thing that we in the Muslim world have to, I guess, the Brothers Grimm or La Fontaine. So parents tell children stories about Mullah Nasruddin in a way to impart complex questions. Again, this idea of complexity, relativism, notions of relativism, perspective, morality, ethics, but in a very first degree, stupid sense of humor. So typical Mullah Nasruddin story is, Mullah Nasruddin is on one side of the river, and somebody yells, "Mullah Nasruddin, how do I get to the other side of the river?" And he says, "You are on the other side of the river." So behind this are these different notions. My favorite one is he's always riding backwards on his donkey, so he's riding into the future but facing the past. And this is a figure interesting enough that we have in Benjamin's Angel History, of course, facing the rubble of the past, but also the way that Sartre described Baudelaire as driving into the future, but with an eye always in the rearview mirror, sort of looking over his shoulder. My favorite Nasruddin anecdote is somebody asks Nasruddin, "Hoja," that's me, sir. My time's up. Nasruddin Hoja, they ask him, "Why are you always riding backwards on your donkey?" And he says, "Well, there's no point in both of us looking in the same direction." what's interesting is in our generation, jokes are not cool. I grew up with parties of adults telling each other jokes, and literally like getting together and telling, did you hear the latest joke? And if you do that today, you won't be invited back to the party. Right. Believe me, you won't. But there's a great, I think since we're reliving these kind of new Cold Wars, and it's very disturbing to see many friends and colleagues on the left become foaming at the mouth, Russophobic McCarthyists. There's a great book called Hammer and Tickle, which was a kind of a taxonomy of jokes and what jokes landed which people in jail throughout the Eastern Bloc. I'll end with a recent one I heard. A friend of mine in Dushanbe, in the capital of Tajikistan, a gentleman comes up to him and says, do you know why there hasn't been a revolution in America in 200 years? And my friend says, no, why? And he says, because there's no American embassy in America. So, given one of the countries I come from is Iran, and it's the only country in the Middle East with no U.S. embassy, and it's the most stable, I think that's quite a relevant joke. So, thank you very much.